So, Roger, we've got a world that's ever shrinking with modern technology, but I always say I like to see the whites of people's eyes and get to shake their hand personally. A little bit too freaky that way. So, how can we use Skype, Google Plus, and other similar technology to build relationships when we're thousands of miles apart as we are?
Well, Andy, I love, of course, my background comes the other direction, right? I started in the web conferencing industry 15 years ago, and I make 80% of my presentations worldwide using GoToMeeting or whatever. But I think one of the most important things to think about is to not focus on technology, but to focus on human beings, right? So, for instance, two things right here. One, making eye contact with the camera as opposed to looking at you means you're looking at my eyes as opposed to, but that's something I do consciously because I'm looking at the camera
Yeah.
instead of you making you look at my forehead. The second thing is, if I'm gonna call my wife, I say I'm gonna talk to my wife. I don't say I'm gonna do phone, right? But somehow we think of this technology as the mysterious thing. No, it's just a tool, and I'm
But
not going to do Skype like I don't do Twitter. I'm just talking to Andy.
But on that first point, it's interesting because I'm looking at the camera now, and I've been consciously trying to do that since, particularly since you started speaking. But my urge, my natural urge, is to look down
Yep.
and look at you, and that's where I find I'm building the relationship because I can see you. Whereas if I look at the camera, so that we're making eye contact, or certainly you feel we're making eye contact, then I can't. I can only see you in my peripheral vision.
Yes.
So how do you get over that? Because I think that's a really big challenge that a lot of people struggle with.
I would remember that you want to put that in context of the nature of the communication, right? You and I are having a coffee shop chat, even
Yeah.
though we're half a world away. It would be different if I'm making a keynote presentation where I might want to make eye contact with the camera here, no different than if you're in a television studio and making eye
Yeah.
contact with the camera. But here's the one thing I really believe, even though that's useful for how we draw people in, because to them you're making eye contact with them. I did 2.5 years ago. I did a 1,200 person video conferencing study for Citrix, the people that make GoToMeeting, GoToWebinar, etc.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I learned is that while that is a useful tool, in this context, people don't expect you to make 100% eye contact or have composed your environment like a newscaster when the purpose is either more casual or collaborative as opposed to presentation or speaking oriented.
Okay. Which is what we're talking about. We're talking about the personal approach
Right.
rather than the presentations. So while you've been speaking, I've probably been 60 to 65% looking at the camera as I am now, and maybe about 30% looking at you as I am now. Did you notice the changes in eye direction while you were speaking to me?
I didn't because I've been mostly staring at the camera because
Yeah.
I treat it personally, kind of like listening to you on the telephone and
Mm.
making eye. But that's probably just an old habit for me. Now, if I make eye contact with you, here's another tip: if I'm back a little farther from the camera,
Yeah.
that angle decreases,
Yeah.
meaning you notice that less than if I'm close and I go back and forth
Yeah.
like that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a fair comment as well.
But back
Okay.
to but if we start with don't worry about techniques or technology. Talk about just connecting with people
Yeah.
and going, wow, I can make facial contact with you and have a coffee shop conversation, despite getting on an airplane. That's a potent part of a relationship.
So, which is the best? Let's talk about the technology for a moment. So I
Yeah.
think you're absolutely right with that point. But which is the best of the technologies to use? Because we've mentioned Skype, we've mentioned WebEx, we've mentioned Google Hangouts. Beforehand, we were talking about when you were on Skype on your mobile phone earlier. Are there any do's and don'ts and any recommendations for the best technology to use for this?
I would be careful. Skype, Google Hangouts, there's free versions of web conferencing technology, GoToMeeting, and a number of the professional tools have free versions that you can use. The one thing I would remember is that free and professional in these tools are probably
Yeah.
like any other set of tools, right? You probably don't want to get up and make a presentation using, a really crappy laptop and some free presentation software. No, you make an investment. So remember, there's probably a difference. Skype's great. Because a lot of people use it. A third of the world's teleconferencing traffic goes through
Yeah.
Skype. Google Hangouts is great because it's got a few additional features, but it's a
Yeah.
bandwidth pig and sometimes has issues. And the other thing that I would just say is that you might find that a free version of a professional web conferencing tool might be a great step for you. It might not be fully featured, but it might bring you more than you get with, say, Skype or Google Hangouts.
Do you leave the social networking versions? So let's talk Skype and Google
Mm-hmm.
Hangouts. Do you leave them open and live so people can just prod you if you're around and see you online, or do you only talk to people when it's booked in an appointment, so to speak?
I do both, kind of depending on the context. I know some people leave Skype open all the time. I more often than not don't because I usually forget to open it up.
Yeah,
But I am also hyper available in real time through multiple channels. So if you
yeah,
ping me on Twitter, that's probably a more real time channel for me than
yeah,
Skype is.
yeah, yeah. Okay. And finally, lots of things that people can do, and there are benefits. We can be talking to people face to face when we can't see them in person. What are the don'ts? What are the top three things that people tend to do when they're trying to communicate using technology, and it really, really backfires on them?
Well, I think if I was to sum up three of them in one thing, it is that we try to do in a new medium what we do in an old medium, right? The
Okay.
first thing is always, it's not like being there in person. I like to be there in person. Well, you know what? I like being with my wife in person too, but that doesn't mean I don't use Skype when I'm in Australia and she's in Portland, Oregon, and that's a great tool for as part of the mix of how we go to each other. So one of the challenges is when we move to a medium like this, let's say communication or presentation, is that we compare it to the previous because
Yeah.
that's what we naturally do. Any change of
Yeah.
medium, we always compare it to our known experience, as opposed to going, now not only what changes, but what can I discover on the other side of that? What can I do new or unique or better? Not just
Okay.
being a world, half a world away, but what are, like right now, I can type to you, even using Skype, I could type to you a hot link that you could click on and go to. Try that on a piece of paper when you're in an in-person conference room.
Which is something I'll do a lot on Skype calls. Actually, is I'll share links as we're
Yeah.
chatting and
And
so
as
on.
you get more and more professional sets of features around you, you've got more and more of those kinds of options. But we
It's
don't
good.
think of that. The first thing we notice is what we lose, not what we gain.
Yeah. Excellent, Roger. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to chat to you virtually.
My pleasure. Thanks, Andy.